What would force Jack Nicklaus to publicly give the PGA Tour's newest leader exactly 1 week to answer for a decision that most people haven't even seen? Golf legends don't issue deadlines without a reason, especially not someone who has spent decades protecting the game's reputation. Yet after reportedly reviewing a confidential roadmap tied to Brian Rolapp's vision for the tour, Nicklaus reached a point where staying silent was no longer an option. Instead of immediately exposing what concerned him, he did something even more unexpected. He started a 7-day countdown and challenged Rolapp to explain the direction the PGA Tour was heading before the entire golf world began asking the same difficult questions. The focus wasn't on tournaments or trophies anymore. It was on one unanswered question. What inside that proposal was serious enough to make Jack Nicklaus break his usual silence? If the concerns were minor, none of this would be happening. But if they weren't, the future of the PGA Tour could be entering one of its most closely watched moments in years. Before we uncover why this countdown has everyone paying attention, let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing where golf fans are tuning in from. And if you love deep dives into the biggest stories shaping professional golf, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because once you understand what reportedly led to this extraordinary deadline, you'll also understand why so many people believe the next 7 days could determine far more than just one executive's response. The biggest mystery was never the 7-day deadline itself. It was the document that reportedly led to it. Brian Rolapp had quietly been shaping a long-term vision for the PGA Tour, a proposal intended to guide professional golf through its next era. Like any major strategic plan, it wasn't designed for public discussion. Only a small circle of senior figures was believed to have seen its details, making every rumor surrounding it even more intriguing. Among those trusted voices was Jack Nicklaus. His influence reaches far beyond tournament victories, and when someone with that level of experience studies the future direction of the sport, people naturally pay attention. Those who expected him to quietly endorse the proposal were surprised when speculation began suggesting he had left with more questions than confidence. Instead of publicly criticizing every detail, Nicklaus reportedly chose restraint. He believed golf deserved clarity before confrontation, giving leadership an opportunity to explain the thinking behind the proposal before drawing wider conclusions. That decision immediately shifted attention toward one critical issue. If someone known for protecting the game's legacy felt the need to pause before offering his support, then perhaps the discussion was bigger than a routine business strategy. The real concern wasn't simply that a confidential plan existed. It was whether one part of that vision raised questions significant enough to make one of golf's most respected figures believe the future of the PGA Tour deserved a closer look. As speculation continued to grow, the conversation gradually shifted away from the existence of the proposal itself and toward one far more important question. What inside it could have convinced Jack Nicklaus to stop and demand answers before supporting the tour's direction? According to those following the situation, the concern wasn't centered on one tournament or one season. It was the long-term impact the proposal could have on the identity of the PGA Tour. Reports suggested the vision focused heavily on expanding commercial opportunities, attracting larger investments, and adapting the tour to an increasingly competitive sports market. While few would argue against growth, critics began wondering whether some of those ambitions could unintentionally reduce the influence of the players and alter the traditions that had defined professional golf for generations. For someone like Nicklaus, whose career was built on protecting the competitive integrity of the game, those questions were impossible to ignore. Rather than publicly rejecting the proposal, he reportedly chose a more measured approach. By allowing 7 days for an explanation, he left the door open for leadership to provide context that the wider golf community had not yet heard. Yet that decision also created another mystery. If clarification was all Nicklaus wanted, why did he believe the situation was urgent enough to attach a deadline instead of simply waiting for a private conversation? The deadline itself soon became just as significant as the proposal. If Jack Nicklaus had wanted to criticize the PGA Tour, he could have voiced every concern the moment he walked away. Instead, he reportedly chose something far more deliberate. By giving Brian Rolapp 7 days, he signaled that this wasn't about creating headlines or forcing a public confrontation. It was about giving the tour's leadership one opportunity to explain a vision that many people still didn't fully understand. What made the countdown even more compelling was that it extended far beyond Nicklaus and Rolapp. As the days passed, the uncertainty surrounding the proposal quietly reached players, tournament officials, and others connected to the tour, leaving many of them wondering whether the future they had been preparing for was about to look very different from the one they had expected. As the countdown continued, the conversation gradually moved beyond the leadership offices and into the locker room. Whether every detail of the proposal was accurate or not, one fact became impossible to ignore. Jack Nicklaus had publicly questioned the direction of the tour without immediately revealing why. That alone was enough to make players start paying closer attention. For many competitors, the concern wasn't about resisting change. Professional golf has always evolved, and most players understand that the PGA Tour must continue adapting to new business realities and growing competition. The uncertainty came from not knowing where those changes might eventually lead. If one of the game's most respected figures believed the proposal deserved another explanation before moving forward, it naturally raised questions inside the very group expected to live with those decisions. While players searched for clarity, another group had every reason to pay attention. The companies investing millions of dollars into the PGA Tour depend on one thing above all else: confidence in the product they are supporting. Sponsors understand that change is part of every major sport, but uncertainty is far more difficult to accept. When someone with Jack Nicklaus's credibility publicly signals that important questions still need answers, it naturally becomes a conversation that extends beyond the fairways. That growing attention quietly increased the pressure surrounding Brian Rolapp. The issue was no longer limited to explaining a proposal to one legendary golfer. Every day without greater clarity encouraged more speculation about whether the concerns raised by Nicklaus reflected something larger than a difference of opinion. As confidence became the center of the discussion, the countdown started carrying a level of significance that reached far beyond boardrooms, players, or sponsors alone. Rolapp also found himself in an unusually difficult position. As the PGA Tour's leader, he wasn't responsible for protecting only one group. He had to balance the interests of players, tournament organizers, broadcast partners, sponsors, and millions of fans while preparing the tour for an increasingly competitive future. Any response he gave would be carefully examined, and every word carried the potential to restore confidence or deepen uncertainty. As the final days of the countdown approached, the focus slowly shifted away from what Nicklaus had reportedly seen inside the proposal and toward a far more pressing question. Would Rolapp's response answer those concerns, or leave the golf world with even more questions than before? Before we find out how this countdown unfolded, I'd like to hear your opinion. If you were in Jack Nicklaus's position, would you have handled this privately, or was making the deadline public the right move? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this breakdown, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth golf stories that go beyond the headlines. By the time the 7th day finally arrived, the countdown had become far bigger than anyone expected. What began as one respected voice asking for clarity had evolved into a moment the entire golf world was watching. Players wanted reassurance, sponsors wanted confidence, and fans simply wanted to understand why someone like Jack Nicklaus believed this conversation couldn't wait any longer. At the same time, Nicklaus's position remained remarkably consistent. According to the speculation surrounding the situation, he had never demanded confrontation for its own sake. His message had always pointed toward one goal: greater transparency before decisions capable of influencing the PGA Tour's long-term direction moved forward. Whether that explanation would strengthen confidence or leave lingering doubts was now the question hanging over professional golf. By this stage, the countdown had already accomplished one undeniable result. It had forced everyone connected to the tour to think far more carefully about where the game was heading and who would shape that future. By the end of the countdown, the discussion had evolved into something much larger than a single proposal or a single deadline. The golf world was no longer waiting just to hear whether Brian Rolapp would respond. It wanted to know whether his explanation could restore the confidence that had gradually been replaced by uncertainty throughout the week. If Rolapp could clearly explain the reasoning behind his long-term vision, many believed the conversation might finally shift back toward the future of the PGA Tour rather than the controversy surrounding it. A transparent response had the potential to reassure players, strengthen confidence among sponsors, and demonstrate that the tour's leadership was willing to listen before moving forward with decisions carrying long-term consequences. If those answers failed to address the concerns that had been raised, however, the questions surrounding the proposal would almost certainly remain. At that point, the issue would no longer be about a confidential document. It would become a lasting debate over trust, communication, and whether the people guiding professional golf had truly earned the confidence of those expected to follow their vision. Whether Brian Rolapp's explanation ultimately satisfied Jack Nicklaus or not, one reality had already become impossible to ignore. A single 7-day deadline had sparked a conversation reaching every corner of professional golf, forcing players, sponsors, fans, and tour leadership to think more carefully about the direction the game was taking. Sometimes the biggest moments in sports are not decided by a winning putt or a championship trophy, but by the difficult questions that demand honest answers before the future can move forward. Now, I'd like to hear your opinion. Do you think Jack Nicklaus was right to publicly push for answers, or should conversations like this stay behind closed doors? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more in-depth golf stories and analysis that go beyond the headlines.